Hello and welcome to Hardlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to go through different styles of Indian birth charts in North, South, and East. So let's get into it. So to compare the different style charts, we're actually going to be using the same birth data, and we're going to be using the birth data of U.S. President Joe Biden, who was born November 20th, 1942, approximately at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think that's the closest birth time you can get for him. I don't know if there's an exact birth time available. And he was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, USA. So the first type of chart we're going to look at is a North Indian style chart. So here's an example. So you can see it's a square, and what you want to do to kind of orient yourself is in a North Indian style chart, you want to look at the top of the chart, because the top of the chart represents the ascendant, or we also call it the rising sign, or we also call it the lagna in Sanskrit. This is the first house. It's also called the first house of the chart. So what an ascendant, rising sign, or lagna is, just briefly, is that this is the constellation or sign that is rising in the east as the person is born. So it's the sign that's kind of rising in the east, yeah? So that's what it is, but how you orient in this type of chart. So again, in the North Indian style chart, when you go to the top diamond there, that's always going to be your ascendant. That never changes. But what does change is the constellation. So in Joe Biden's chart, the top square, top diamond, is the ascendant, rising sign, first house lagna, all the same thing basically. And you see that little 8 in the corner. That 8 represents the 8th sign of the zodiac, or constellation of the zodiac, and the 8th sign of the zodiac is Scorpio. Okay. Then in a North Indian style chart, you count counterclockwise. You count the houses counterclockwise. So the second house is actually, you go back from the ascendant. So you can see in the second house here, I put a 9. The 9 represents the 9th constellation of the zodiac, which is Sagittarius. And then you basically count the 12 houses going counterclockwise in North Indian style chart. Okay, so you can see here, Joe Biden in the North Indian style chart, in the top square, the ascendant, he's got Sun and Venus in Scorpio. Okay, so let's look at the next style so you can compare. But again, we're going to be using the same data for Joe Biden, so you can compare and contrast the different styles. So the second style we're going to look at here is a South Indian style chart. It's also a square, but in this case, the signs do not change, the positions of the signs do not change, but the ascendant changes position. So you can see here, if you go to the top left corner and then over 1 square, I have a little 1 in the corner there. That 1 represents the first sign of the zodiac, which is Aries. And this is the thing with South Indian style charts. The second square here, it will always be Aries. And so, because it's always Aries, you don't actually need to put these little numbers like 1, 2, 3, or whatever. In the North Indian style chart, because you're always changing the ascendant, you always need to know, like, okay, the top square is always the ascendant, but what constellation are we looking at here? So, the other thing that's unusual about the South Indian style chart, of the different style charts we're looking at, it's the only one where you count houses clockwise. So you can see here, the second square in the top left corner, 1, that's Aries. Then you count clockwise, so the next square has a 2 in it. That's the second sign of the zodiac, which is Taurus. So Joe Biden has Moon in Aries, and he has Saturn in Taurus. The little line under the planet indications just means retrograde, which is not really relevant, but just in case you were wondering. It's not really relevant to the conversation today. But the thing is, in the South Indian style chart, you always know where Aries is, you always know where all the constellations are, but then you need to designate where the ascendant is, and so that's usually done manually. Like, they'll actually write ASC or Lugna, or like they'll make little hatchings, like the red little hatchings I made here in Scorpio, because that's Joe Biden's rising sign or ascendant Lugna. They're all the same, different words for the same thing. So, again, we've got Scorpio, the 8th house, is the 8th constellation. We've marked it with the 2 red hatchings, and he's got Sun and Venus here. Yeah, so, again, it's kind of useful to know this information in case, like, you're used to one style, and then you come across another chart, and you're like, oh, how do I make sense of this? And, I was trained on a North Indian style chart system, so that's what I use. I'm very comfortable with it. But yeah, so let's look at the next one. So the next style of chart is the East Indian style chart. So again, it's a square to begin with. Some people think of it as like a mix between the North Indian style and the South Indian style. You can kind of see why once I describe it. So it's similar to the South Indian style because the constellation positions never change. So the top square is always going to be Aries. That's why you have a 1 there. 1 is being the first constellation of the zodiac. That's always Aries. So in the East Indian style, the top square, it's always Aries. It's similar to the North Indian style, though, because you count counterclockwise. So the first square at the top is Aries. Then you go backwards into the left corner, and that second spot there is going to be the second constellation of the zodiac, which is again Taurus. So again, he has Moon in Aries, Saturn retrograde in Taurus. So you can see though that because the constellations don't change position, then you gotta like designate somehow where the ascendant is. So they usually do the same thing in the North Indian style, where they designate it somehow. They either write ASC, ascendant, Lugna, or they usually mark like little hatchings, like the red hatchings I put here. So again, in the East Indian style, the top is Aries, but if we look at the hatchings here, that's in the 8th house. Again, I've put the numbers here, but in this style chart, because the constellations never change positions, you don't actually need to put these numbers, but you do need to mark the ascendant. So again, he's got Sun and Venus in Scorpio, and that's his Lugna or ascendant. Okay, so that's the East Indian style chart. And then just for fun, but also comparison, I've also included a Western style chart. So you can see immediately, one of the big differences is the Western style chart is a circle, not a square. I guess it sort of looks like this guy when you stare up. So the thing here is that it's sort of like the North Indian style chart, and that the ascendant, you always know where the ascendant is because the ascendant is always on the left side. Instead of at the top, it's always on the left side. And like most of the charts, you count counterclockwise. So those are the similarities and differences. Now the thing though is that you also not just have to convert the kind of chart system, chart markings and all that kind of stuff. Like there's like little glyphs here. You can see the little symbols. These are symbols for like Sun, Mercury, Venus. I haven't seen them used, at least in the training I've had in Vedic Astrology. There might be. But the other thing is that when you convert from a Western, not just Western style chart to some sort of Indian style chart, but you also have to convert the whole paradigm, because currently there's about a 23.5 degree difference between the Western style system in terms of where they place planets and the Vedic astrology system. I'm not going to get into why, but so for example, if I start talking about astrology, somebody usually says, oh, I'm like a Scorpio. So in the Western system, when somebody says I'm a Scorpio, what they're telling me is where their sun is in the Western system. They're not telling me the ascendant. So that's a big difference between the Western style and the Vedic astrology systems. is that they emphasize different things. So if somebody tells me in the Western system, oh, I'm a Scorpio, one, they're telling me where their sun is. But the other thing is, if I'm converting it to Vedic astrology, there's a 23.5 degree difference. So if somebody tells me their sun is in Scorpio, I have to subtract 23.5 degrees, which may still be in Scorpio because each constellation is 30 degrees. So if their sun is in the last few degrees of Scorpio, they will still have their sun in Scorpio in the Vedic system. But, again, 23.5 degrees out of 30, for the most part, majority of the time, their sun is going to be in the constellation before. So instead of them being a sun in Scorpio, they're going to be a sun in Libra. Yeah, so instead of Scorpio in the 8th constellation, they're going to be sun in Scorpio in the 8th constellation of the zodiac. Their sun is going to be in the 7th constellation of the zodiac, or Libra. So you can see with this chart, like all of a sudden, Joe Biden's ascendant is in Sagittarius, but it's in the first few degrees of Sagittarius. So if you subtract 23.5 degrees from this position of the ascendant, his ascendant is going to land in the constellation before it, or Scorpio. Yeah, which is what we've seen with the 3 Indian style charts, is that his ascendant's in Scorpio. So if we look at his sun here, and we also know in the Indian style charts that his sun is in Scorpio, you can see the sun, the little glyph here for the sun is like the circle with a little dot in the middle. That's the glyph or the symbol for the sun in the Western system. You can see though that his sun is in the last few degrees of Scorpio. So if we subtract 23.5 degrees, he's either going to be in the beginning part of Scorpio, or he's going to be at the end of Libra. So it looks like he's in the last few degrees of Scorpio, so his sun is still in Scorpio when you convert it to the Vedic system. Got it? So again, with Western style charts, you not only have to convert the way that things are laid out, but you also have to account for the degree difference. Alright, so there you go. So 3 different, North, South, and East Indian style charts, and then, the Western style chart just to compare. But again, hopefully this is helpful if you're ever looking at different style charts or trying to convert from one style to the other, so they make sense to you. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this and you found it helpful, and it helps you navigate not just charts, but, your life. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.